Can I call the meeting to order, please? We shall now start the interactive dialogue with the Commission of Inquiry on the Human Rights in Eritrea. It is now my pleasure to welcome to the podium the following members of the Commission of Inquiry: Mr. Mike Smith, Mrs. Sheila Kitharuth, and Mr. Victor Dankwa. You are heartily welcome here. Delegations wishing to inscribe on the list of speakers should do so by using the electronic system. I would like to ask the Secretariat to activate the electronic system for inscription on the list of speakers. Please activate. You have now 1 minute to inscribe on this list. So the provisional list is beginning to be shown on the screen. The list of speakers will be closed in 15 minutes, and let me now turn to Mr. Mike Smith, Chairperson of the Commission of Inquiry, to present his report. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vice President, distinguished members of the Human Rights Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, and thank you all very much for the opportunity to present to the Human Rights Council the findings of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea. I'm joined on the podium by my fellow Commissioners Sheila B. Kitharuth and Victor Dankwa. We presented our first report to you 12 months ago, documenting a multitude of human rights violations in Eritrea. The Human Rights Council unanimously approved, without a vote, a resolution and mandated the Commission to determine whether these violations might amount to crimes against humanity and to address the issue of accountability. The Commission has concluded that Eritrean officials have committed crimes against humanity. The crimes of enslavement, imprisonment, enforced disappearance, torture, persecution, rape, murder and other inhumane acts have been committed as part of a widespread and systematic campaign against the civilian population since 1991. The aim of the campaign has been to maintain control over the population and perpetuate the leadership's rule in Eritrea. I want to focus on some of the crimes the Commission documented. With regard to the crime of enslavement, the Commission found that the violations relating to Eritrea's military/national service programs include their arbitrary and indefinite duration, often for years, beyond the 18 months set out in the law, the use of conscripts as forced labour, including manual labour, the inhumane conditions of service, the rape and torture often associated with service, and the devastating impact of these programs on family life and freedom of choice. Despite promises to the contrary, the Eritrean government has taken no steps to address any of the problems associated with its military and national service programs. For these reasons, we have concluded that Eritrean officials have committed the crime of enslavement. The use of arbitrary detention has been and remains routine across Eritrea. It is not only reserved for critics of the government. Indeed, many of the witnesses to whom we spoke described arrest and lengthy detention for reasons difficult to discern or categorise. The vast majority of those detained said that they had not been brought before a judge, tried or involved in any form of judicial proceeding. In addition, the government very rarely informs family members or judicial authorities about detentions, and most detainees described widespread torture. These acts are ongoing and constitute crimes against humanity. The Commission has also documented various acts of sexual and gender-based violence. In military training camps and in the army, some young women are used as slaves to perform domestic duties and are also raped. Rape is also committed in detention facilities by officials and guards, not only against a significant number of women, but also against men. While some forms of torture are used against both men and women, other forms are gender-specific, such as the beating of pregnant women in military training camps or in the army to induce abortion. Instances of sexual violence against men were also documented by the Commission, including sexual torture done intentionally to ensure these men are no longer able to reproduce. The Commission found that the crimes it documented have been committed primarily, directly or indirectly, by state and ruling party officials, military commanders and members of the National Security Office. The Commission has identified alleged perpetrators and has compiled files on those individuals to assist future accountability mechanisms. The Commission has concluded that the government of Eritrea has neither the political will nor the institutional capacity to prosecute the crimes we have documented. We therefore recommend that the UN Security Council refer the situation in Eritrea to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and that the African Union establish an accountability mechanism. The Commission has also asked Member States to prosecute or extradite suspects on their territories and that the Security Council impose travel bans and freeze the assets of individuals suspected of crimes against humanity. I would like to highlight some of the recommendations to the Human Rights Council. Renew the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on Eritrea and provide the mandate holder with additional human and financial resources. Keep the situation in Eritrea on its agenda and invite the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to report periodically on the situation of human rights. Support the establishment of a structure by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights with a protection and promotion mandate, in particular to ensure accountability for the crimes against humanity set out in our report. We are aware that several visitors to Eritrea, as well as some diplomats based in Asmara, have recently painted a more favourable picture of Eritrea. We have been mandated by the Human Rights Council to investigate systematic, widespread and gross human rights violations that generally take place in isolated locations and behind closed doors, in places where casual visitors, journalists and diplomats do not have access. The Commission would have wished to visit the country and have unhindered access to sites and locations, but was denied such a visit by the government of Eritrea. Our findings are based on detailed statements and information from over 833 individuals in over 13 countries, the overwhelming majority of whom have personally suffered human rights violations in Eritrea. We have been able substantially to corroborate the information provided by these witnesses. We also selected and contacted a sample of 500 individuals who wrote to us saying that our first report was inaccurate and further we read with care the written submissions of thousands more. In our report we have acknowledged some signs of increased engagement from Eritrea with the international community, including with OHCHR, but we have not noted any substantial change with regard to the human rights situation there. Where is the rule of law in Eritrea? The rule of law must be paramount in any country. The government and its agents must be subject to the law. People who have their rights abused must have an avenue to raise their grievances, and when they do, they should not be arrested and thrown into prison. Rather, they should be heard by a properly constituted independent court which is staffed by professional judges who are also not frightened of being arrested. So long as there is no constitution, so long as there is no parliament where you can debate national questions, so long as there is an abusive national service which is unending, so long as there is no free press, so long as there are no civil society organisations apart from government-appointed ones, so long as people live in fear and are controlled by the state, there will be no full enjoyment of all human rights and no real progress for the Eritrean people. The preamble of the ICC statute states that crimes that shock the conscience of humanity, such as those that we have documented in our report, threaten the peace, security and well-being of the world and therefore must not go unpunished. We need collectively to bring the perpetrators of these crimes to justice, not only for the sake of the countless number of Eritrean victims, but to demonstrate that such behaviour is simply unacceptable anywhere in the world today.
I thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for this presentation. And as is the practice in our discussions, we shall start by hearing the delegation of the country concerned. So I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Mr. President, Excellencies, yesterday, June 20th, was a day of remembrance and rededication in Eritrea, as the people paid tribute to over 85,000 of their fellow citizens, men and women who died fighting for the liberation and defense of their country. Today, here in Geneva, thousands of Eritrean citizens are holding a peaceful march. I stand with Eritrea, calling for a fair and just treatment for their country. Many of them are recent arrivals and former national service members, and they bring with them a petition signed by 200,000 people. Last month, the people of Eritrea celebrated 25 years of independence with pride and joy. The Commission of Inquiry denies this reality and claims that it has reasonable ground to believe that Eritrea has committed crimes against humanity since its independence. Stepping way over its mandate, the Commission has made the incredible judgment that the human rights situation in Eritrea constitutes a threat to international peace and security as a pretext to send yet another African country to the International Criminal Court. In its preliminary response, Eritrea has answered to this charge point by point. It has shown the Commission has not presented evidence to support its accusations. Eritrea has presented facts and figures that reveal the methodology the Commission followed were so flawed and lacked rigor and balance as to compromise its findings. The Commission has ignored all positive developments in Eritrea. More crucially, the Commission's case is legally indefensible as it fails to prove that the alleged crimes were indeed persistent, widespread and systematic. In saying this, Eritrea is not suggesting that it has achieved all its human rights goals or that over 25 years there have been no individual transgressions. It readily acknowledged that there have been instances of violations and that it has taken perpetrators to justice. It's also focused on strengthening the entire administration of justice in the country with a view to fostering the rule of law. In addition to its own measures, Eritrea has embarked on active engagement in fulfillment of its international obligations. It has accepted 92 UPR recommendations and is actively working to implement them. It has established cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner and has invited a number of thematic mandate holders to visit the country. To meet the needs and respond to the aspirations of its young people and to address migration, Eritrea has introduced a raft of national measures and is actively participating in regional and international arrangements. More broadly, after a difficult period, Eritrea is now entering a new phase as the economy is growing again, institutions are being built, programs that had been deferred are back on the horizon. Eritrea's regional and international engagement is growing, investment is coming, a promising political, economic and social landscape is emerging. Eritrea's approach to nation-building development, ensuring fundamental freedoms and dignity, is one of national ownership and responsibility. It always works to first mobilize internal resources and then actively seeks partnerships. The way forward, therefore, must be based on fairness and justice. It must build on what has painstakingly been achieved in the past few years. It must be cooperation and collaboration which are already yielding important results. This contrasts with the confrontation and escalation advocated by the Commission, which can only have dire consequences for the region. It's no coincidence that the same week that the Commission released its report saw the worst outbreak of hostilities over the border since the end of the war 16 years ago. As we speak, Ethiopia is making preparations for a bigger military offensive and is contemplating a full-scale war. Ethiopia reckons that the gross accusations against Eritrea afford it with a perfect pretext, and that it may be now or never. It reckons that those who are eager to blame Eritrea will look the other way and fail to act, as Ethiopia commits what are truly crimes against humanity against its people and unleashes another war. It reckons that the guarantors of the 2000 peace agreement will continue to refrain from taking meaningful action to uphold international law. In light of the unfairness of the accusations leveled and the gravity of its ramifications, Eritrea calls for a fair, just, constructive, and collaborative approach, which in any case must be the principle that guides the work of the Human Rights Council, not only towards Eritrea, but for all countries. Finally, Eritrea has tabled a draft resolution reflecting its proactive stance to consolidate human rights, and it calls on all member states to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The list of speakers is now closed, and I would now like to proceed with our interactive dialogue. So I now invite interested delegations to put questions to the mandate holders and to make comments. Speaking time limits will be 3 minutes for member states and 2 minutes for observers. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. The European Union thanks the Commission for its work in gathering evidence on the basis of a high number of interviews and submissions. We regret that the government did not grant it access to the country. While acknowledging the difficulties for the Commission to gather clear evidence on alleged human rights violations, the EU takes note of its findings that there are reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed in Eritrea since 1991. The European Union is deeply concerned that human rights violations have been committed against Eritreans in relation to the national service. The EU recalls that those responsible should be held accountable. The European Union notes that the Commission's recommendations, including the request to the UN Security Council to refer the situation of Eritrea to the ICC, the establishment of an accountability mechanism under EU auspices, or that Ethiopia or Eritrea should implement the findings of the Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission. The EU is mindful that the Commission recommends strengthening the engagement of the international community with the government. We consider that a conditional policy of engagement within Eritrea can contribute to inducing the reforms needed to improve the human rights situation. The European Union invites the African Union to get involved on this issue via its institutions. We urge Eritrea to take concrete measures to improve the human rights situation in cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and in particular through the implementation of the UPR recommendations. The EU, which stands ready to help Eritrea in these efforts, has allocated funds for this purpose and pursues discussions with the government. We call on Eritrea to fully cooperate with all international human rights mechanisms and to increase its cooperation with the Office of a High Commissioner for Human Rights and urgently address the human rights situation. Question: could you indicate what additional evidence you have found since your 2015 report to support the findings about possibly crimes against humanity? Second, could you elaborate on the assistance that the international community should grant the Eritrean authorities to improve the situation of human rights? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now invite Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président, la Suisse...
Mr. President, Switzerland would like to thank the Commission of Inquiry on the human rights situation in Eritrea for their report and their extensive work. To the members of the Commission of Inquiry, Switzerland is gravely concerned by the widespread flagrant violations of human rights that have been committed in Eritrea. We note that the situation has been unchanged since your last report presented in June 2015, and which confirms the reasons which lead you to call certain violations as crimes against humanity. Switzerland emphasizes its support for the Commission of Inquiry and that of the Special Rapporteur. We welcome the recommendations that you make to the government of Eritrea and the international community, as well as multilateral bodies, and we encourage a more in-depth discussion on this. In this context, my delegation would like to reiterate its appeal to the government of Eritrea to fully respect human rights of its people and to make a constructive commitment to implementing the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry. In addition, we call on Eritrea to cooperate fully with the mechanisms of the Human Rights Council and to guarantee them access to the country, in particular to prisons and other relevant institutions, so as to enable an in-depth investigation into the situation on the ground. Not allowing access to the country for the special procedures of the Human Rights Council can only reinforce the presumption that the country has something to hide. Moreover, Switzerland is convinced that it is fundamental to guarantee accountability for violations of human rights committed and to bring the perpetrators to justice. This is first and foremost the responsibility of the government of Eritrea. Moreover, we call on Eritrea to ratify the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and to accept its competence since July 1st, 2002. To the members, how can the international community contribute to guaranteeing accountability for violations that have been committed? Mr. President, the international community, and in particular the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, has recently stepped up efforts to establish cooperation with Eritrea. A sincere and constructive commitment from Eritrea is necessary for the dialogue and cooperation to be able to contribute to improving respect for human rights in the country. Switzerland encourages Eritrea to continue cooperation in the context of the Universal Periodic Review. Moreover, opening up the country to international mechanisms and cooperation at the technical level with these mechanisms would be positive signs. Switzerland reiterates its readiness to continue the dialogue with the agencies and multilateral mechanisms, as well as with Eritrea, and to support efforts to improve the situation of human rights in Eritrea. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Et de la palabra.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Cuba.
Gracias, señor presidente. Cuba está...
Thank you, President. Cuba is convinced that cooperation and dialogue must prevail in human rights situations which require the support of the international community. We favour an approach which tries to build bridges so that we understand different situations and that we can identify solutions which will take everybody's concern into question. This is the only way that we will be able to implement effective measures which promote and protect the human rights of people affected. By way of principle, Cuba does not favour the involvement of the Human Rights Council in specific country situations. It's not part of its mandate. The involvement of the Council means that there will be a punitive approach to finding solutions to the issue concerned. This restricts the possibilities which could be explored. These would be opportunities for a constructive approach, building international cooperation through technical assistance and support from the international community. This support could be provided preferably by neighbouring countries. Cuba believes that the Council should not give up on looking for new avenues of cooperation and dialogue with Eritrea for a exchange of opinions which would drive forward true international cooperation. This would help us move towards the promotion and protection of all human rights for all men and women. Thank you.
United Kingdom, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The United Kingdom thanks the Commission of Inquiry for its report. We share the Commission's concerns regarding human rights in Eritrea, in particular shortcomings in the rule of law and indefinite national service. In our bilateral engagement with the government of Eritrea, we've made clear that we want to see tangible improvements, including amending Eritrea's national service system, implementing its constitution, and releasing those arbitrarily detained. We welcome the government of Eritrea's renewed cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
In light of the Commission's report, we believe that this cooperation should be intensified. The United Kingdom urges Eritrea to work with the OHCHR and the UN system more broadly on further human rights reforms. We urge the government to continue to strengthen its relationship with the international community, to explore ways in which the international community can assist it to strengthen the capacity of the judiciary to investigate concerns, such as those mentioned in the Commission's report. We recognise that the mechanism of the Special Rapporteur is an important tool for the international community to strengthen its engagement with Eritrea. The United Kingdom calls on both the Special Rapporteur and the government of Eritrea to consider ways that they might work together constructively to enhance the progress Eritrea has begun to make in its human rights observance. Mr. Vice President, we welcome Eritrea's constructive participation with the Universal Periodic Review and its partnership with UNDP to help implement the 92 recommendations of the UPR which it has accepted. The best hope of addressing the allegations of human rights violations which the government of Eritrea has acknowledged may have been committed is to pursue this constructive approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now invite Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Germany aligns itself with the statement made on behalf of the European Union. Germany thanks the Commission of Inquiry for completing its work and for engaging in the interactive dialogue with the Council. We are disappointed that despite repeated calls to do so, the government of Eritrea has not cooperated with the Commission. We are concerned about the finding of the report of the Commission, which expresses reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed in Eritrea since 1991. Germany believes that the nature of the report merits a constructive response by the government of Eritrea. The report also lists a number of serious human rights violations that continue to take place in Eritrea. We are concerned that there does not seem to be any recourse to justice for victims of such human rights violations. Germany therefore urges the government of Eritrea to take serious, concrete and visible steps to hold those persons accountable who are responsible for the crimes that have and continue to be committed. The willingness of the government of Eritrea to work together with the OHCHR and to allow foreign journalists to visit is, in our view, a first step in the right direction. We urge the government of Eritrea to build on this. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much. I now invite Australia.
Mr. Vice President, Australia thanks the Commission of Inquiry for its second report. We continue to be deeply disturbed by the Commission's findings of reports of human rights violations, including arbitrary use of and open-ended duration of military service, absence of judicial processes, arbitrary detention, disappearance and torture. Australia is disappointed that the Commission has still not been able to visit Eritrea, an allowance that, if given, could have signalled some recognition by the government of Eritrea of the widely shared concerns of the international community. Australia welcomes increased engagement by the government of Eritrea with UN bodies such as the OHCHR and recent releases of some political prisoners and prisoners of war. We welcome the recent commitment by the government to work with the UN on implementing Eritrea's UPR and mainstreaming human rights. These efforts must be intensified. We encourage Eritrea to remain engaged with the international community. We note the Commission's second report states that there are reasonable grounds to conclude that crimes against humanity have been committed. Australia urges Eritrea to implement fully the 1997 Constitution, to respect international human rights and humanitarian law, and to allow citizens the safe and full expression of liberty as it is their right. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much. I now invite Norway.
Mr. Vice President, Norway thanks the Commission of Inquiry for its report and takes notes of its recommendations. As a long-standing friend of Eritrea and its people, we are deeply concerned by the reports of grave human rights violations and lack of accountability for crimes committed. Norway is committed to strengthen our engagement with the government of Eritrea. Our aim continues to be to improve the human rights situation in the country and strengthening accountability. The implementation of universal periodic review and the recommendations of other human rights mechanisms should continue. We welcome the visit made to Eritrea by the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We also welcome Eritrea's expressed commitment to strengthen the judiciary and improve conditions of detention in collaboration with the UN system, including the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We understand that Eritrea has extended invitations to several thematic special rapporteurs, and we urge the UN and Eritrea to cooperate to make these visits happen as soon as possible to the benefit of the Eritrean people. In particular, and in line with Norwegian human rights policy, we urge Eritrea to create and maintain a safe and enabling environment for civil society, human rights defenders and journalists. Norway also welcomes the Commission's recommendation for Member States to insist on the implementation of the decision made on 13 April 2002 by the Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission on the delimitation of the border. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I invite China.
Mr. Vice President, I am making this statement on behalf of Pakistan and my own country, China. We have always advocated constructive dialogue and cooperation among states in addressing differences in the field of human rights, and we are against politicization of human rights issues. On progress and achievements made by Eritrea in the protection and promotion of human rights, the international community should make due acknowledgement. As a developing country with an underdeveloped economy, Eritrea is constrained by its economic and management capacity in the promotion and protection of human rights. We urge the international community to view practical difficulties facing Eritrea in an objective manner and provide it with technical assistance and capacity building support according to its will and needs. At the same time, we call upon relevant human rights mechanisms to engage in full and effective communication with Eritrea and to strictly discharge their mandates following the principle of objectivity and neutrality in order to play a constructive role for the protection and promotion of human rights. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, and I invite Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Portugal would like to warmly welcome the distinguished members of the Commission of Inquiry on Eritrea and thank them for the presentation of their report. In this regard, we regret that the government of Eritrea has failed to respond to the Commission's repeated requests for access to the country. However, we acknowledge the fact that some meetings have occurred between representatives of the Eritrean authorities and members of the Commission. We are deeply concerned about the Commission of Inquiry's findings that there are reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed in Eritrea since 1991. We are also concerned that the Commission has determined that Eritrean state officials have engaged in a persistent, widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population in Eritrea. Furthermore, we regret that no improvement in the rule of law took place since the last report of the Commission and that the gross human rights violations that it documented on that occasion still persist. We therefore welcome the recommendations of the report, in particular the request to the UN Security Council to refer the situation of Eritrea to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court for consideration, as well as the appeal to the government of Eritrea to ensure accountability for past and persistent human rights violations. In this regard, we concur on the need to renew the mandate of the Special Rapporteur and to keep the situation of Eritrea on the agenda of the Human Rights Council. In this context, and following one of the recommendations of the report, we would be interested to hear the views of the distinguished members of the Commission of Inquiry on how do they envisage the strengthening of the engagement of the international community with the government of Eritrea. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, and I invite Belarus to take the floor.
Belarus is convinced that achieving progress in the area of human rights is possible only on the basis of cooperation and involving all parties in a mutually respectful discussion on equal footing. Country resolutions and country mandates which do not enjoy the support of the countries concerned are counterproductive. And as we have already said today, they are of no use. We note in the report of the Commission information on the Eritrean government's interest in cooperation with international human rights mechanisms, in particular the visit which took place at the invitation of the government of the country of an OHCHR delegation to carry out a technical assessment, and also the visit to Eritrea of a delegation from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. We also note that the government of Eritrea is determined to uphold its commitments as part of the Universal Periodic Review. We believe that further expansion of cooperation of Eritrea with human rights mechanisms will help to strengthen national capacity in the area of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. J'invite la France à prendre la parole.
I call upon France to take the floor. Thank you, Vice President. France aligns itself with the European Union statement. We welcome the important additional work carried out by the Commission of Inquiry on the human rights situation in Eritrea. Following the presentation of its first report in June 2015, the Council decided to renew the mandate of the Commission of Inquiry in order to carry out further inquiries. The Commission has now confirmed that certain human rights violations in Eritrea, such as enslavement, imprisonment, forced disappearance, torture, persecution, rape and murder, are tantamount to crimes against humanity given their systematic and widespread nature. Once again, France regrets deeply that Eritrean authorities have not given the Commission of Inquiry access to their territory. We are deeply concerned at the conclusions of this report, which should be examined by the Security Council. We are engaged in fighting against impunity throughout the world. Those responsible for crimes and serious human rights violations should be brought to justice. The whole of the international community must be galvanized so that these violations stop in Eritrea. Our responsibility in the Council is to fully contribute by taking full stock of the seriousness of the situation, decide what follow-up to give to the report. We fully support renewing the mandate of the Special Rapporteur, who could be tasked with following up on the Commission's recommendations. The contacts established between the Eritrean authorities and the OHCHR, which have enabled country visits in recent years, are a step in the right direction. We encourage the authorities to pursue this avenue and also to swiftly implement the commitments that they made during the UPR. We call upon the authorities to fully cooperate with all United Nations mechanisms, particularly those established by this Council. Thank you.
Merci. J'invite le
I now call upon Djibouti. Thank you, Vice President. Djibouti congratulates the Commission of the Inquiry on the quality of its report on the human rights situation in Eritrea. We're deeply concerned by the fact that there's been no improvement in the human rights situation in Eritrea since the first report of the Commission of Inquiry. We also share the Commission's finding according to which crimes against humanity have been committed in Eritrea. We support the creation of a structure by the OHCHR with a mandate to promote and protect, given the attacks on human rights in Eritrea. We call upon all prisoners to be returned, including the those who were taken prisoner in 2008. There are 13 who are still missing. We would like to take this opportunity to warmly thank His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the Emir of Qatar, for his decisive role in freeing 4 of our prisoners of war. There are 13 who are still missing, and we call for this and other urgent issues to be settled, such as the demarcation of the border and an end to Eritrea's attempts to destabilize our country. We subscribe to the recommendations of the Commission and the international community, notably that the perpetrators of crimes against humanity should be brought to justice and victims given appropriate reparation by giving them the right to truth and reparation. The Commission of Inquiry has a strong mandate, and the light that it's shed on the human rights situation in Eritrea should strike a chord with the international community.
Djibouti and Somalia intend to submit a draft resolution that we hope offer such kind of response. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now invite Venezuela to take the floor.
Thank you, Vice President. We iterate our steadfast position of not supporting specific mandates against sovereign countries, particularly when these mandates are not accepted by the concerned country, which is the case of Eritrea. We deplore the fact that with these mandates is an attempt to use the Council as a political instrument, and this has in no way contributed to improving the human rights situation. These initiatives violate the universal principles of respect for integrity, sovereignty and non-interference in the domestic affairs of states, which are principles enshrined in the UN Charter. We hope that these mandates, which have been imposed for over 20 years, will for once and all be wiped off the agenda of this body, so that we can have true dialogue and cooperation, which are the pillars of our work. We call upon the members of the Council to refrain from supporting the imposition of specific mandates against countries which violate the inalienable right to self-determination. History has proved that they have been ineffective. Thank you. Thank you very much.
America?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The United States thanks the Commission of Inquiry for its work and for the report on the terrible human rights situation in Eritrea. We have repeatedly expressed grave concern about the human rights situation in Eritrea, both in the UN and bilaterally, and the Commission's findings reinforce this concern. We take note of the Commission's conclusion that there are reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed in Eritrea. With thousands of Eritreans fleeing their country each month, the Council must continue to look for ways to improve the country's dire human rights situation. We strongly encourage the government of Eritrea to engage fully with the international community and UN bodies to address its human rights challenges. The government's willingness to work on several universal periodic review recommendations is a first step in the right direction. We also urge Eritrea to implement its constitution, hold national elections, honor its commitment to limit the duration of national service to 18 months, develop an independent and transparent judiciary, and release persons arbitrarily detained, including political prisoners, journalists, and members of religious groups. The United States recognizes that the mechanism of the Human Rights Council, including the Special Rapporteur, are important tools for the international community to strengthen its engagement with Eritrea. We call on the government of Eritrea to grant access to the Special Rapporteur and urge the government to consider ways that working with the Special Rapporteur could improve the human rights situation in Eritrea. Our question is as follows. Beyond granting access to the Special Rapporteur on Eritrea, what other concrete steps that the government of Eritrea to demonstrate seriousness of purpose for addressing its human rights challenges? Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. I now invite Spain.
Thank you, President. I would like to begin by conveying our concerns, and we join the African Union about the concerns following armed clashes in the border area with Ethiopia. We urge the parties to find a peaceful solution. We thank the Commission of Inquiry for its work and its detailed report of findings such as enslavement, arbitrary detention, torture and murders. We have always steadfastly supported the value of the special mechanisms of the Council, and we deeply regret the lack of cooperation towards this mandate and call upon the government to cooperate so the situation doesn't deteriorate and that we can support the necessary reforms to improve the human rights situation for Eritreans. Recommendations accepted at the UPR should be followed up on the international community to see if they're being implemented. We take note of the government's cooperation with the OHCHR and hope that this will be strengthened. There must be accountability, and that's why we support the African Union's mechanisms such as the African Court of Human Rights and People's Rights and the African Commission itself. We also think that the recommendation of establishing a specific accountability mechanism is an interesting point. We join the call on the Eritrean government to fully cooperate with international human rights mechanisms and to respect the obligations of the treaties to which it is a state party. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now invite Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ghana thanks the Commission for its report. We note with satisfaction notable developments in Eritrea since the Commission's report, including, among others, the granting of access by Eritrea to an OHCR delegation to undertake a working-level technical assistance visit to Eritrea, as well as the release of 4 Djiboutian prisoners of war. However, Ghana regrets that the government of Eritrea has yet to grant access to the Commission of Inquiry to carry out its mandate. Just a while ago, we heard the response of the Eritrean delegation, which was sharing its perspective on the work of the Commission. We believe that that perspective could have been better exchanged with the Commission if it had been granted access. Mr. President, Ghana calls on Eritrea to implement fully and without delay the 1997 Constitution and to make necessary amendments to the Constitution in a transparent and participatory manner. Mr. President, we are taking the floor to speak on a matter concerning an African country, and we do so in keeping with the African Union Declaration of this year as the Year of Human Rights for Africa. And that declaration emphasizes the principle of non-indifference. The principle of non-indifference speaks to the need for us to speak truth to our friends. So we're taking this floor to encourage our friends in Eritrea to give the fullest cooperation to all human rights mechanisms, which are aimed at helping each of us to do better in the field of human rights. In conclusion, Ghana wishes to recall the bilateral relations between Eritrea and Ghana, which remain strong. And so in the spirit of that friendship, we call on Eritrea to take note of the concerns that have been expressed by the Commission, in particular the reports of widespread systematic human rights abuses, and to cooperate to ensure accountability and justice. Mr. President, finally, the Agenda 2063 also informs the spirit with which we have taken the floor. And this agenda expects that Africa shall build a continent of free citizens with expanded horizons, where the potential of everyone to be free from fear and disease and want is realized. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, and I invite Botswana.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the Commission of Inquiry on Eritrea for its report. Mr. Vice President, the report of the Commission speaks to a wide range of what it calls serious human rights violations. These include, but are not limited to, arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, torture, reprisals against third parties, sexual and gender-based violence, restrictions on freedom of expression, assembly and association, enslavement, and extrajudicial killings. The Commission has also reached the conclusion that crimes against humanity may also have been committed by Eritrean authorities. This conclusion was reached on the basis that the violations were persistent, widespread, and systematic, using the reasonable grounds to believe standard of proof. The report further states that prospects for accountability for those responsible are minimal. Without substantial institutional and legal reform resulting in an independent judicial system, the report doubts that credible results can be expected from existing national mechanisms. In sum, according to the Commission, democracy is lacking. Mr. Vice President, the findings and conclusions of the Commission should concern this Council. In order to address this situation, the Commission makes a wide range of recommendations covering governance and administration of justice, arbitrary arrest, torture, reprisals, unlawful detention, and enforced disappearances, accountability, and monitoring action by various bodies, including the OHCHR. It is our view, Mr. Vice President, that the range of recommended measures would contribute to the promotion and protection of human rights in Eritrea. It is commendable that Eritrea is party to some of the most important instruments relating to civil, political, and economic rights, torture, discrimination against women, and the welfare of the child. Part of their efforts should be directed at assisting Eritrea to comply with their obligations under these and other instruments. We note with regret, Mr. Vice President, that the Commission was denied access into Eritrea. We note with appreciation that the OHCHR visited the country at the government's invitation in February 2016. For its part, we are aware that the government finds the report partial, lacking in objectivity, and selective. The government also disputes the findings of persistent, widespread, and systematic violations of human rights. Clearly, Mr. Vice President, cooperation with the Commission would enable the interrogation of these matters and benefit both Eritrea and the Council enormously. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and I invite Somalia.
Mr. Chairman, we commend the Commission of Inquiry in the Human Rights in Eritrea for delivering its second report, which has been both transparent and impartial in manner. In the Commission's findings, we are deeply concerned that Eritrea continue to be subjected to unidentified national service, arbitrary detention, reprisal for alleged conduct of family members, discrimination on religious or ethnic ground, sexual and gender-based violence and killings, leaving Eritreans no other alternate but to flee from their countries. Somalia has always supported the relentless pursuit of self-determination by Eritrea people, their aspirations and their inviolable rights to a life free of fear and harm. It's in this spirit that we once again bear the responsibility to raise concern at the deterioration human rights situation in Eritrea. The Commission in its findings highlights that there has been an increase in the number of Eritreans that have sought asylum in Europe, more than double than in 2013. Mr. Vice President, we note recent development in Eritrea, the release of 4 Djiboutian prisoners of war is a step towards the right direction. I call on Eritrea to clarify the fate of the remaining other political prisoners and urge the government to respect this obligation and their human rights and remove barriers to access their families and humanitarian organizations. In line of this statement of Djibouti, we, in line with them, that we will be submitting a resolution on the human rights in Eritrea. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, we reiterate our support of the Commission of Inquiry and urge the government of Eritrea to safeguard the human rights of Eritreans.
Thank you very much. I now invite Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Let me join my colleagues in thanking the Chair of the Commission, Mr. Smith, for his comprehensive briefing. Like many others, Ukraine remains highly concerned by the appalling human rights situation in Eritrea. In this respect, we fully endorse the report of the Commission of Inquiry and its recommendations to the government of Eritrea regarding the ongoing systematic, widespread and gross violations of human rights in this African country. Given the absence of positive improvements since 1991 with respect to the crimes against humanity in Eritrea, Ukraine flags its backing of the Commission's recommendation to the Human Rights Council to transmit the present report to the General Assembly, the Secretary General, and the Security Council for further follow-up on its suggestions. As a member of the Security Council, we are ready to use all tools at its disposal, including targeted sanctions, in order to oblige the government of Eritrea to respect human rights and to ensure the implementation of the mentioned recommendations. We also call on the African Union and regional powers to intensify their important role in prevention of human rights violations and crimes against humanity in Eritrea, using all their influence over the government of this country. I thank you.
Thank you. And I invite Nicaragua.
Gracias, señor vicepresidente.
Thank you, Vice President. Nicaragua reiterates its rejection of unilateral mandates which have double standards and which politicize this council against legitimate governments. It is a violation of the principle of equality amongst states, as well as political independence, integrity and sovereignty. This mandate goes against the spirit of cooperation and dialogue which should prevail amongst equal states. Vice President, we firmly believe that the path of respect based on peace, dialogue and consensus is key for progress and well-being. To round off, Vice President, we reiterate our call for cooperation and dialogue based on good faith. This is what should prevail amongst states, so that today we can together properly fulfill the mandate of this Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I invite Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation takes note of the Commission of Inquiry's second report, A/HRC/32/47. The report outlines grave violations and abuses of human rights in Eritrea since the country's independence, documented from interviews with various sources in 13 countries visited by the mandate holders. Mr. President, we note that the Eritrean authorities have refuted the findings of the Commission of Inquiry, as well as the appointment and renewal of 2 mandates of the Special Rapporteur and the Commission, and state that this will detract from their ongoing efforts to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms, as undertaken through various processes, such as the Universal Periodic Review. Mr. President, given the very wide and divergent positions of the Eritrean government on the one hand and the Commission of Inquiry and the Special Rapporteur on the other, the question arises as to how the issues highlighted in the report can be addressed in order that the Council can be assured that the people of Eritrea are offered protection and due process for any violations of their human rights, and at the same time the government of Eritrea can be seen to fulfill the obligation of states to promote and protect the human rights and fundamental freedoms enshrined in the international human rights instruments to which it is a party. Mr. President, Kenya believes strongly in the rule of law and the principle of natural justice. Therefore, it is our view that the Council must support a process that engages the government of Eritrea, as ultimately they are the ones who are expected to promote, protect, and guarantee the rights of the Eritrean people. Secondly, in light of the Commission of Inquiry's report, efforts should be made to validate its findings through the establishment of appropriate mechanisms that will carry out credible investigations that shall ensure that anybody found liable for egregious human rights violations is held to account. To that end, Kenya notes the recommendation by the Commission for an African Union accountability mechanism to be set up, supported by the international community, to deal with the alleged human rights abuses. Such a mechanism would help to ensure that due process is provided for and should be considered in light of the seriousness of the Commission's allegations. I thank you.
Thank you, and I invite Belgium to take the floor.
Mr. Vice President, Belgium fully supports the statement made by the European Union. Belgium would like to thank the members of the Commission of Inquiry for the report on the situation of human rights in Eritrea, which speaks of very grave and alarming violations. We also appreciate the practical difficulty facing the Commission in establishing and verifying facts of violations of human rights in Eritrea. We take note of Eritrea's commitment to cooperate with the international community in implementing the recommendations which were made during its Universal Periodic Review. Like the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, we note the release of prisoners of war from Djibouti and the release of former Eritrean combatants. We hope that these signs of openness will be confirmed and will finally allow constructive cooperation of the government of Eritrea with human rights mechanisms. We regret the refusal of the government of Eritrea to allow the Commission entry and broad access to its territory. On a number of accusations which are mentioned in the report, only an on-site visit of the Commission would make it possible to verify facts and to establish the context in which potential problems continue, so as to provide lasting solutions to them. A recurring issue in all of the reports on the situation of human rights in Eritrea is the indefinite duration of military service, which affects in particular young generations. Recent information indicates that there have been changes. The state, for example, has committed to pay salary after 18 months of military service. Is this information confirmed? And are they significant changes? It is clear that national service of indefinite duration is an important cause of clandestine migration out of Eritrea, and that guarantees about its limitation in time could help to reduce this migration, thus reducing the grave violations of human rights that migrants suffer at the hands of unscrupulous human traffickers in the Horn of Africa and the entire Mediterranean. What are the latest developments in the area of migration, and what are the measures necessary to stop the abuses committed by traffickers? Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci, la Belgique.
Thank you, Belgium.
I now call on Sudan.
حضرة نائب الرئيس أخذ وفد.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. My country has studied the report of the Commission of Inquiry on Eritrea, and we emphasize the importance of the principle of neutrality, non-politicization, and the use of double standards. And there needs to be single standards used for all. We appreciate cooperation between Eritrea and some international human rights mechanisms, such as the Universal Periodic Review, and also the welcoming of a visit of the High Commissioner's Office in February. My country encourages Eritrea to uphold its commitments to a new constitution and other programs for reform, as well as cooperation with human rights mechanisms. Mr. President, my delegation has reservations about the attitude of the Commission, which is based on the definition of crimes in the Rome Statute. Eritrea is not a party to the Rome Statute, and the accusations that are made lack evidence. The Commission did not even visit Eritrea or meet those responsible. We emphasize the need to cooperate with the country concerned to carry out the mandate of the special procedures. This is why we also oppose politicization and the link with the Security Council. We oppose politicization, which aims to send the issue to the Security Council, because reality shows that the International Criminal Court targets Africa and not other continents. This is why African leaders have shown themselves to be very reserved about the court. Upholding human rights requires the cooperation between the state, civil society, and improving the performance of all for the service of human rights. Thank you.
For translation. I now invite Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ethiopia thanks the Commission of Inquiry on the situation of human rights in Eritrea for its report, which focuses on ensuring accountability of the systematic, widespread, and gross violations of human rights committed by the Eritrean regime against its own people. The report provides comprehensive analysis of the appalling and shocking human rights situation in Eritrea and establishes beyond doubt that the Eritrean regime has been committing since its independence 25 years ago and continues to commit crimes of enslavement, imprisonment, enforced disappearance, torture, and other inhuman acts, persecution, rape, and murder, extrajudicial execution, and summary executions with impunity. The report is quite conclusive in its determination that there are reasonable grounds to believe that these acts committed by the Eritrean regime constitute crimes against humanity, and that there is an urgent need to ensure accountability. Mr. President, in light of this robust and extensive report in which overwhelming evidence to the most extreme forms of human rights violations presented, the Council will be failing the victims of these crimes if the perpetrators are not accountable to their actions or allowed to go unpunished under all applicable international and regional laws. Ethiopia welcomes the report emphasis on the centrality of ensuring accountability in addressing these crimes against humanity. As I speak, the eyes of the victims are on the Council, waiting for justice to be served. It is the responsibility of this Council, as the embodiment of the conscious and the highest moral authority of the community of nations in the field of human rights, to come to the help of the Eritrean people and free them from their sufferings in the hands of their own repressive government. It is high time to take decisive action and to show that the Council stands for the rights of the victims of Eritreans in the time of their utmost need. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I now invite Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ireland aligns itself with the statement made on behalf of the EU and adds the following. Mr. Vice President, Ireland welcomes the second report of the Commission of Inquiry and would like to thank the members of the Commission for their painstaking work and commend the bravery of all those who provided testimony. Ireland is deeply disturbed by the conclusions in the Commission's report that citizens of Eritrea are subjected to unacceptable violations of their human rights, including rape, murder, arbitrary detention, enslavement and persecution on religious or ethnic grounds. Ireland is particularly concerned at the Commission's finding that there are reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed in Eritrea. This confers an urgent responsibility on the government of Eritrea to end these crimes immediately and to work with the international community to bring those responsible to justice. Many of the violations reported are linked to abuses within the National Service Programme. In many cases, national service does not appear to be related to the security of the country or indeed the civil service, but includes also forced cheap labour in a range of economic activities. Indeed, it would seem that the current structure of the national service is having an overall negative impact on the development of the country, as it prompts thousands of young able citizens to flee Eritrea. The violations described in the report are compounded by the efforts to conceal them. Ireland deeply regrets that the Commission team was not permitted access to the country. We also regret attempts to undermine the credibility of the Commission and those who gave testimony. Rather than dismissing the content of the report, we would urge the government of Eritrea to fully cooperate with international human rights mechanisms, lift restrictions on independent media, and grant access by independent monitors to its detention centres. The people of Eritrea have a long and proud history and deserve the opportunity to participate fully and freely in the development of their country. We urge the government of Eritrea to consider carefully the Commission's report and to immediately put an end to the violations described therein. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much. And this was the last country among the list of speakers of government representatives. We now turn to the list of speakers for national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. And I now give the floor to Conscience and Peace Tax International.
Monsieur le Vice-Président, Mr. Vice President, this statement is being made on behalf of Conscience and Peace Tax International. I'm also a member of the Stop Slavery in Eritrea campaign. The Commission of Inquiry this year has noted that national military service is mandatory and it continues to be lengthened indefinitely in a system which is similar to enslavement. There's a system of holding everyone in fear of military commanders. In Eritrea, there is no provision for freedom of conscience. There are also deserters, and there's often excessive use of force. Even people with persons with disabilities are held responsible for military service. The Eritrean authorities continue to call traitors those who try not to uphold military service. Jehovah's Witnesses are continuing to try to get freedom of conscience, but they are continue to have to carry out military service. They don't have access to their families. The government refuses to provide the families with information about the place that they are being held in detention. Eritrea revoked citizenship for Jehovah's Witnesses by a presidential decree because of freedom of conscience for military service. In March 2016, over 30 Jehovah's Witnesses were held in detention in difficult circumstances in metallic cells which caused the death of a number of the detainees because of the hot weather and of poor treatment. We call on Eritrea to put an end to the service of indefinite mandatory military service and not taking into account conscientious objection from military service or freeing from people who have disabilities or for religious reasons. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Center for Global Non-Killing. Center for Global Non-Killing, please.
Mr. President, I deliver this statement on behalf of the Center for Global Non-Killing, and I'm also a member of Release Eritrea. The Commission of Inquiry has uncovered heinous crimes against humanity being committed in detention facilities, military facilities, and other locations inside Eritrea since 1991. The catalogue of crimes include enslavement, imprisonment, enforced disappearance, persecution, rape, murder, torture, and other inhuman acts. Amongst other findings, the report cites extrajudicial mass execution carried out by the regime against disabled veterans in 1994, Muslim teachers in 1997, conscripts in Addis Ababa prison in 2004, killings in Wi'a military training camp in 2005. This and many other crimes have been committed in a persistent, widespread and systematic manner as part of the government's policy to instill fear, maintain control over the civilian population, and in the context of the absence of independent judiciary, National Assembly, and other democratic institutions, creating a context of lawlessness and associated culture of impunity. Mr. Vice President, despite the abject nature of these crimes, the response from the regime has been total dismissal. We therefore support the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry. On the recommendation of referral to the ICC, it should be taken into consideration that from our perspectives, the essence here is ensuring accountability for violations taking place by ending the culture of impunity and consequently improving respect for human rights in Eritrea. I thank you.
I thank you. I now invite the International Fellowship of Reconciliation.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the Commission of Inquiry for its final report. We also take this opportunity to thank the hundreds of women and men who bravely came forward with evidence for the Commission's report, risking the government's reprisals. This report is their voice, as it is for the millions of other ordinary Eritreans, our brothers and sisters. Mr. Vice President, many years ago when I first started attending this council, I found there was limited knowledge of the reality of Eritrea's human rights situation. Diplomats were deeply moved when they heard about the tragedy, but often felt powerless to act through a lack of substantive international documentation. It is now 4 years since this council established a special rapporteur on Eritrea and 2 years since it established a commission of inquiry. Both mechanisms have left us no more room for ignorance. In particular, the Commission's report has captured the voice of my people, crying out in their agony and their sufferings. However, the report has not just provided cast iron evidence of government-sponsored atrocities. It has also mandated and empowered this Council to end them. The report concludes that crimes and violations occurring in my country are of the highest order and almost certainly constitute crimes against humanity. It also says that the Eritrean government is not in a position to ensure accountability for these crimes. However, the report empowers the Council to seek justice at a higher level. Diplomatic friends and colleagues can and now must act. Listen to the voices of Eritreans in the report. The grandparents, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters. Act for them, act for their futures, and act for the good of Eritrea. Do all that you can to ensure their voices are now heard at the Security Council and beyond, and let us bring an end to this suffering. Thank you.
Thank you, and I invite the Human Rights Watch.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Human Rights Watch notes with deep concern the conclusions of the Commission of Inquiry that many of the abuses committed in Eritrea, primarily those related to indefinite national service, imprisonment without trial, denial of rights to speech, press, assembly, and practice of religion, use of torture and inhumane conditions of imprisonment, are widespread and systematic. The abuses found in the Commission's report this year and last are unmistakably serious violations of international human rights standards, as well as of treaties to which Eritrea is a party. the patterns of abuses documented, as well as the findings that there has been no change in Eritrea's national service policy or improvement in the patterns of repression overall, are in line with Human Rights Watch's own research and underline the need for increased pressure and transparency about the situation through credible and sustained international monitoring. We call on the Eritrean government to implement the many essential reforms and recommendations, including steps to improve the rule of law, for accountability for the serious violations, and to ratify the Rome Statute. We urge the Council to renew the Special Rapporteur's mandate to ensure continued public reporting on human rights conditions and on implementation of the Commission's recommendations, to take meaningful steps to advance accountability, and to transmit reports to the General Assembly for follow-up. Under the principle of universal jurisdiction and in accordance with their international law obligations, all states should investigate and, evidence permitting, prosecute in a fair trial individuals found on their territories who are alleged to be responsible for human rights violations in Eritrea amounting to crimes under international law, notably torture and enforced disappearances. Human Rights Watch remains deeply concerned that thousands of Eritrean asylum seekers fleeing their country each month face unlawful confinement in closed refugee camps, a risk of refoulement, forced return to persecution or other serious harm, as well as kidnapping, extortion and violence by smugglers and traffickers. The Council should urge all members to respect Eritreans' free movement rights, allow Eritreans to lodge asylum claims, fairly assess those claims, and grant the UN Refugee Agency access to all detained Eritreans seeking protection. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite Civicus, World Alliance for Citizen Participation.
It's me? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. Civicus and Citizens for Democratic Rights in Eritrea welcome the report of the Commission of the Inquiry. Mr. President, we remain deeply concerned by the findings present in the COR report, including those amounting to crimes against humanity, which indicate that there has been no material improvement in the human rights situation on the ground. The absolute and the violent repression of all forms of dissent and civic participation in the Eritrean is emblematic of the extreme consequence of denying people the right to participate in the development of the state. The COL has also found that there has been no change in Eritrean's national service policy and further documents the use of the reprisals, including extrajudicial execution. Most recently, on the 3rd of April 2016, armed forces opened fire on the center of the capital, Asmara, killing the unconfirmed number of young conscripts who were being transferred from Tessenei city to Massawa and attempted to visit their families while there in the Asmara capital. Mr. President, in the light of this complete absence of the national mechanism to address the Commission's findings, it is impressive that the international community, including this Council, support access to justice for the victims of the government grave and the systematic violation of the international human rights law. We therefore urge the Council to take the following measures, including renew the mandate of the special rapporteur on the situation of the human rights in Eritrea, supporting the establishment of the Office of the High Commission for the Human Rights with the protection and the promotion mandate, and finally requesting the High Commission for Human Rights. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, and I invite United Nations Watch.
Mr. Vice President, I'm an Eritrean human rights activist and I'm honored to make this statement on behalf of UN Watch. We commend the Commission of Inquiry and its members for their very important report. The report depicts a broad range of crimes against humanity that have been perpetrated in Eritrea in a persistent, widespread and systematic manner, with the knowledge and acquiescence of high-ranking government officials. The list of crimes against humanity depicted by the report include enslavement, imprisonment, enforced disappearance, torture, other inhuman acts, persecution, rape and murder. The Eritrean government has shown no interest in ending its pervasive culture of impunity. It's now incumbent on this August Council to adopt a robust accountability mechanism to facilitate access to justice to victims of crimes against humanity in Eritrea. In order to achieve this, I call on the Council to adopt a resolution that shall, Firstly, renew the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of crimes against humanity in Eritrea with a revised scope that shall include the responsibility of overseeing implementation of the recommendations of the COI. Secondly, call for the establishment of a structure by OHCHR with a protection and promotion mandate to assist in ensuring accountability for crimes against humanity, as well as periodic reporting by OHCHR on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. Thirdly, these measures need to be supplemented by the imposition of targeted sanctions against the most responsible individuals for the perpetration of crimes against humanity in Eritrea. Mr. Vice President, our call is dictated by the obligation of the international community to say no to crimes against humanity and also by the plight of victims. It's high time for the international community through this Council to act accordingly. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. I now have Women's International League for Peace and Freedom.
Mr. President, WILF stands in solidarity with Network of Eritrean Women on this statement. We endeavor to work towards advocating for the rights of Eritrean women, but for human rights in Eritrea as a whole. We welcome the Commission of Inquiry report and its conclusions on Eritrea and recognize the difficulty it has faced on many levels in documenting sexual violence faced against women and girls. The high incidence of sexual violence and harassment during military service has led to increased early marriages as a means of avoiding military conscription. The report also noted on the array of human rights violations in Eritrea and the lack of legal mechanism for people to seek recourse where their rights have been violated. In spite of these findings, the President's advisor, Mr. Yemane Gabrab, has made comments denying the prevalence of sexual violence in the country. Based on the findings of the Commission of Inquiry report on Eritrea, we call upon the United Nations and the international community to create an independent judicial body inside Eritrea to monitor and investigate all human rights abuses, to ensure those that have perpetrated crimes against humanity are made accountable for their crimes in courts such as the ICC or the African Court for Human and People's Rights, ensure that all those who have suffered from sexual violence in military training camps or in detention are provided with counseling, support, rehabilitation and compensation, ensure that the rights of all women are promoted and protected at all levels in society, ensure that all Eritrean refugees are given protection, ensure that Eritreans inside Eritrea are provided with information, support, humanitarian and medical assistance, ensure immediate humanitarian rescue and assistance of Eritrean refugees in Libya, especially women held under IS or other Libyan militia, ensure the protection of Eritrean communities worldwide who have been affected by the long arm of the Eritrean government, ensure all international corporations, institutions and governments who deal with the Eritrean government and contribute directly or indirectly to human rights violations are held accountable, ensure that any peace-building process includes women and their concerns and needs are addressed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I now give the floor to Eastern Horn of Africa Human Rights Defenders Project.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Eastern Horn of Africa Human Rights Defenders Project welcomes the second report of the Commission of Inquiry highlighting the extremely concerning human rights situation in Eritrea and reiterates its recommendations to the Council. Mr. Vice President, our organization has been working on Eritrea since it was founded 10 years ago. The Commission of Inquiry has brought attention to one of the most concerning human rights situations in the world today. Civil society in Eritrea has effectively been decimated, and at least 15 journalists are still being held in its insalubrious jails, detained in Communicado since 2001. The limited access to the country has affected regional and international NGOs, including our own. We cannot reach human rights defenders in the country who need our support, and those outside of the country are harassed and fear retaliation for speaking critically. The Commission of Inquiry has found that the government of Eritrea is responsible for unspeakable crimes of enslavement, imprisonment, enforced disappearances, torture, persecution, rape and murder, which gives them reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed. Mr. Vice President, we are extremely concerned by the government of Eritrea's refusal to cooperate with the Commission of Inquiry and the Special Rapporteur, and its lack of adequate national mechanisms to address the Commission's findings. The government of Eritrea's rejection of the findings highlights the need for the Council to take steps to ensure that victims of grave and systematic human rights violations, including those amounting to crimes against humanity, access justice. Mr Vice President, we echo the Commission's call for the mandate of the Special Rapporteur to be renewed and for the establishment of a structure by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights with a protection and promotion mandate to assist in ensuring accountability for human rights violations in Eritrea, especially where such violations amount to crimes against humanity. Finally, we call on the government of Eritrea to give sign of life and immediately and unconditionally release all journalists, activists and prisoners of conscience detained for exercising their rights. I thank you.
Thank you very much. This was the last speaker that we could accommodate at this meeting. I will now give the floor to the country concerned for courtesy final remarks. Eritrea, you have 2 minutes. Eritrea, you have 2 minutes, but you're not obliged to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. In the outset, I would like to thank all those countries which have made their statements and contributions, especially those countries which have continuously supported the engagement and cooperation of Eritrea through the UPR and the OHHR and other relevant mechanisms. The fact remains, however, that no evidence and ground has been provided by the COI, which has been clearly described in the main statement. As always, I would like to underscore that Eritrea has been working earnestly to improve the human rights situation in the country. Yes, there are challenges, as always, as has been described always, and we continually work to address this challenge. But there is no systemic and gross violation of human rights in Eritrea. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will now turn back to the Commission of Inquiry and to Mr. Mike Smith for his concluding remarks. You have 20 minutes, I understand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to begin by again thanking all those who have contributed to this interactive dialogue. We, the Commissioners, have listened carefully to all of the interventions and have done our best to internalise them and reflect on them. There have been a number of questions that have been posed. In the next couple of minutes. I will seek to respond to those. I will also give an opportunity for my fellow Commissioners, if they wish to take it, to offer their reaction to some of those questions. The first question that was posed, I believe, was from the European Union, who asked us whether, how it was that in our last report we didn't find that crimes against humanity had been committed, and what new information did we find this time to justify such a finding. The answer to that question is fairly simple. In our first report, we worked extremely hard to gather as much testimony as we could as to what was happening in the country, and that was what we were instructed to do by the resolution that set us up. We reflected on the issue of crimes against humanity, but decided that we had not been asked to make a determination on that. We were concerned about it sufficiently to reflect that there may have been crimes against humanity committed, but given the pressure of time and given the fact that we weren't sure we had all the expertise necessary to make such a grave conclusion, we decided to leave that. The Council, in its wisdom, then asked us to look at that question specifically. So this time we were able to engage far more, or some serious experts in this area. We also interviewed several hundred more of the victims. We re-interviewed some of the ones we had interviewed the first time to try and investigate further, and it was on that basis that we were able to reach the conclusions we've reached. We were asked also by the EU to elaborate on systems that international aid that could assist Eritrea to improve the human rights system in the country. This was also a question posed by at least one other delegation. I think the short answer to that is that the essential thing to happen and the essential recommendation that we have made in this report is that the Eritrean government itself needs to take steps to address the extremely serious human rights situation in the country. The international community can come in behind it and provide it with resources and expertise to help us do that. But it's no good simply offering money if there is no will and no obvious steps being taken to actually improve that situation. Now, one other delegation asked specifically what steps the government should be taking. Well, we think the single most important is to introduce the rule of law into the country. And that means not introducing new laws. What it means is introducing a system which is higher than the government itself, government authority. What that is a constitution. It is the institutions that are able to hold government and government agencies and government individuals to account for what they do. And this is a fundamental tool and a fundamental system for any properly running state. So anything, the first step that we believe should happen, that the Eritrean authorities do, should be to introduce the rule of law by adopting a constitution or implementing the very good one they already have, and then supporting it by creating an independent judiciary and enable victims to be able to bring their complaints forward. We were asked about how the international community could contribute to guaranteeing accountability for the past violations. And here let me just say in passing that some delegates in their questions and in their statements addressed really the future. They were talking about how do we better engage, how do we encourage Eritrea to move in a more positive direction, which is all well and good. But I want to underline, and we in our commission have underlined, that we have also been looking at what's happened in the past. And there are a lot of people out there who are looking for justice and accountability. So there is a forward-looking part of this report and there is a backward-looking part. And we should never forget that crimes have been committed and there should be some accountability for that. And the international community can help to achieve that accountability by following the recommendations that we put in the report, including by encouraging the Security Council to refer the matter to the International Criminal Court. There were several specific questions by Belgium. Firstly, as regards to the National Security Service, whether reports that the government is now paying higher salaries to national security individuals after they've served their 18 months. We have also heard rumours to that effect, certainly as relates to the ones who are working in government offices, who are in desk jobs, if you like. What we don't know and what we've never heard is whether these extra payments are being made to those who are working in military units and on work gangs, as it were, far from the capital. So our short answer is we cannot determine and we cannot say if that is the case. There was also a question from Belgium as to what steps we need to take to deal with people traffickers. That is a matter that is well beyond the competence of this Commission. We simply didn't look at that issue because we were looking at human rights violations within the country, but it is definitely something that emerged in our discussions with victims and witnesses, and it is something that in our first report we made a very strong recommendation that action was very much needed to address this problem. Now, before winding up, I'd like to ask my two fellow commissioners if they have anything to add. No? Okay, well look, I just wind up by saying, in conclusion, that we, all three commissioners, would like to express our deepest appreciation to the hundreds of people who came forward and spoke to us about their personal experiences. This report and these conclusions and these the documented human rights violations that we have put in these reports are based on interviews with individuals who told us their own personal experiences. We forced them, in a sense, to relive some of the most traumatic moments in their lives, which was a very tough thing to do. And so for those people, I have a very special and heartfelt thanks. But these people who came forward are only the tip of an iceberg, and that iceberg stretches down into the hundreds of detention centres in the country, to the military camps, and to the training centres where these where nameless people and unseen people have suffered these sorts of abuses. This report at the end of the day belongs to those people. That's who we've done this for. And it is up to the Eritrean government to respond to their own people, to the people who have suffered for too long. And that's what this whole exercise is about.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. I think these were actually very substantive closing remarks. I wish to thank you and your colleagues from the Commission for your presence and participation, but above all for the painstaking work of collecting evidence and testimonies from people who, as you just said, it was a hard effort for them to provide them. So I want to thank you for all this groundwork, and I think it's indeed, as you stated, a very important contribution to the work of this Council, and I'm sure delegations have duly taken note. We have now concluded this interactive dialogue, and I want to give you the opportunity to take back your time. We have here in this meeting one more item to address. I understand that a delegation has requested to exercise a right of reply. I think this was before I took over this chair, but I now would like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey, who has 3 minutes.
Mr. Vice President, we are exercising our right of reply regarding unfounded accusations made by the representative of the Syrian regime this afternoon, which we categorically reject. We have once again observed an attempt to divert the attention from its own brutal atrocities by twisting and falsifying the facts. It tries to hold the international community responsible for its own crimes and failed policies, which are a blight on humanity. Turkey is and will be countering terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Our counter-terrorism efforts and our contribution to international cooperation to that end is well known by our partners. In the context of the fight against foreign terrorist fighters, additional security measures have been introduced. To be factual, Turkey has formed a no-entry list that contains almost 40,000 names. More than 3,000 foreigners were deported so far, and only within the last year more than 2,300 individuals were detained due to their affiliation. Therefore, we deplore even the slightest hint that brings our determination into question. The Syrian regime, which has lost its legitimacy long ago and has been categorized as a state sponsor of terrorism, was condemned countless times by the international community for its brutal policies and has a well-known record of aiding terrorist organizations and providing safe haven to terrorist leaders. In this regard, the representative of such a regime, which is also responsible for the flourishing of Daesh and cooperating with this terrorist organization, is not in a position to speak about counterterrorism. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much. Then this closes our meeting for today. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. to start the enhanced interactive dialogue on South Sudan, followed by a general debate. I hereby declare closed the 22nd meeting of the 32nd session of the Human Rights Council.